Special council meeting to order. And as always, we'll note that the town of Bridgewater is located in Mi'kmaq, the unceded and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and it is our privilege to be here. This is a one-item special council meeting. We are in budget season across Nova Scotia for municipalities, and so tonight we will be really reviewing the operating budget for the first time. And so operating and capital budget will be before you. We'll have a presentation from our Director of Finance. Of course, we're welcoming our CAO back. Welcome. Thank you. It's getting cooler in here, though. Did you turn the temperature down already? Oh, cold. Anyway, welcome back. We're glad to have you back. And of course, thank you to Mark for filling in over the last few months. Did fantastic. So we were in good hands when you were gone, but we're glad that you're back. And I know you love all this attention, so we'll just keep talking about you for a bit longer.
Quite all right.
No? Okay. Yeah, so just for the public, we have a Talk Bridgewater session next
Wednesday during the day.
Yep.
And then, forgive me, you're testing me now. So it's Wednesday during the day from 9 to 1, and then it'll be Thursday evening at the LCLC.
Yeah.
Or Wednesdays at the mall.
Perfect. So we'll discuss budget tonight. We'll discuss budget next Monday as well at council, and then we'll have the two Talk Bridgewater sessions, and then there'll be more talk about the budget. So there'll be lots of opportunity for the public to either watch the council meetings or engage with us, either at the Talk Bridgewater sessions or reach out to us and connect. I would also encourage council, I know tonight we are receiving a lot of information, so if you have questions, of course, ask them. Staff may need to return to the next meeting with answers. And of course, between this meeting and the next meeting, ask away all your questions. So with that, there are no additions or deletions to the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated? Councillor Newell, seconded by Councillor Vergier. All those in favor? Motion is carried. We do have a time for delegations, and so I don't know if there are any members of the public that wish to address council tonight. No? Okay. And then we are right down to business arising, and that is the 2026-27 budget.
Okay, thank you. So you have included on the agenda a PowerPoint presentation which provides a summary of the operating budget as well as the capital and our 10-year capital. And then you have a budget document, and that budget document is a little more detail with respect to the proposed 2026-27 operating budget as well as 10-year capital plan. The format of the budget document you should be familiar with. It's the same format as last year. And so within that budget document, we present a comparison of this year's budget to 25-26, the annual budget for 25-26 and the projected. Then we present the adjusted baseline, which is your core, basically last year's budget adjusted to reflect any increases such as CPI or fuel costs, insurance, those types of things. And then we have a column on additions, and that's really the what's new in our proposed budget for this year. And you'll notice that most of those align with the strategic priorities that council has been discussing at workshops and as was presented last week to council. And then we have a column on deletions, and deletions are those things that are coming out of the budget or the baseline, and those would be things that would have been perhaps strategic priorities last year that were one-time initiatives, or maybe a reduction that we're able to make based on changing. You'll see there's a reduction in software licensing as an example, because we managed to go to the cloud, so we've reduced the cost of those software licenses, so we show that as a deletion. And then you have your proposed budget, which is once you take your baseline, add in your additions and take out those one-time things or adjustments we're able to make, we come to the proposed budget, and then we provide you with the variance. So that's the format. Tonight, the presentation will give you a highlight. We'll focus on what the significant changes in the baseline were, and then we'll talk a bit about the additions and look at kind of what's new and being proposed in the budget. There we go. So this year's operating budget is 4.7% higher than last year's budget, so it's $35.8 million. The capital budget, which council has already received and had a few sessions on, is $31,354,750. And we also have the capital carry forwards of 38 million. So that is a big number, but that number includes the total project cost. So that doesn't mean that we're carrying forward $38 million of projects that haven't been started. It means we're carrying forward the number associated with projects that are well underway and are anticipated to be completed this year, or it could be multi-year projects. So an example of that would be, say, Exit 12A, which had been carried forward, and all the infrastructure associated with that, the cost of, I believe it's around 17 million. We have some St. Philip Street would have been another one that there's carry forwards of various capital projects like that that are large in number. The tax rates that the budget has been prepared on assumes that there will be no tax rate increase. So the tax rates remain the same as last year at $1.85 per $100 of residential, $4.07 for every 100 of commercial, and the LCLC special purpose tax remains this year at 6 cents per $100. And Kim does have an idea of the fiscal year that we'll be looking at for the removal of that, and she can share that with you. The wastewater rate, we're looking at a proposed increase of 20% in the revenue associated with the wastewater rate. So not every rate is proposed to go up 20%. You'll see that the residential rate is 14%. So it's going from 640, is proposed to be 644, which would be a 14% increase. And then every other category under that has a variance in terms of last year's rate to this year's rate. But overall, the revenue associated with the rate is 20% higher than last year. And the wastewater rate funds the cost to operate our wastewater. That includes both the collection and the treatment, and it includes principal and interest on any borrowings that we have to do as well, and the capital associated with any projects that we do. Through this budget, you'll see that the strategic priorities of council are being implemented as proposed. So council had referred them to budget deliberations, and we have shown those as additions to the budget. Budget highlights, under the category of community prosperity, which are really about initiatives that help grow Bridgewater and provide that foundation that's required for growth. We have significant investments in infrastructure that are required to support growth and development. Wastewater, there's $23.6 million in this year's capital budget for wastewater improvements. So a big number. And if we include the associated capital carry forwards, it's a total of 42.4. Road upgrades, there's 800,000 proposed in this year's budget for pavement management, and that's your typical amount that you typically include. But it's also important to note that when we do intersections or road upgrades as part of projects, there's paving involved in that. And the paving, there's Dufferin and Jubilee projects that are being proposed, and those will have pavement associated with those. Sidewalks, 160,000 is included for upgrades to sidewalks, which is comparable to last year. I believe it was the same amount last year. And then the wastewater capacity strategy, there's 135,000 that is proposed to look at the continued development of that strategy, and that is funded by grants, so 100% funded by the Housing Accelerator Fund. Business park development, there's investments that continue in Exit 12A. The 245,000 is the operating associated with Exit 12A, so there's a number of initiatives proposed in the budget that look at land sales and marketing strategy, the development of Phase 2 conceptual plans. So council's looked at Phase 1. Phase 2 is next to be done. And then the project management piece that was discussed during your strategic priorities, where we're going to be entering into that phase of looking at sales and negotiations on those, as well as the planning for Phase 2 that we would require that support for. The downtown development plan will be undertaken this year, and tourism and event strategy and implementation. There's a proposed full-time position proposed, and that would be funded through the marketing levy. And this individual would undertake a number of initiatives, including the development of the tourism and event strategy and the implementation of that. And there's also $25,000 proposed for a major events fund, and that would be funded through the marketing levy as well. Housing Action Plan continues to be implemented, and there are a number of initiatives within the budget that you'll see funded by the Housing Accelerator Fund, and those are, a number of them are part of the Housing Action Plan that Council has approved and received funding for. In terms of community well-being, these are initiatives that would be supportive of more of the social aspects of our community and building that quality of life for our residents. So you can see that we continue to invest in recreation facilities. So there's $3.23 million in total, when you add everything up, that's being invested in recreation facilities. That's the LCLC, that's our parks, playgrounds, and the outdoor pool. And that's operating in capital. And then again, the Housing Action Plan is being implemented with a number of initiatives that look at how to incentivize affordable housing and how to build the foundation required to enable affordable housing within the town. Public transit, we continue to invest in that. There's $63,000 that's being carried forward for stop improvements and shelters. We are able to continue with the extended hours that we put in, I think, 2 years ago, and that is, we've received funding to offset the cost of that. And we're looking at expansions into key areas adjacent to the town's boundaries, and that is one of Council's strategic priorities. We continue to work on reducing energy poverty while Energize Bridgewater is officially winding up. We will be continuing with the PACE program and looking at a movement to a regional home upgrades navigator position. So the budget provides funding for that, the cost sharing of that, and the transition of Bridgewise to a community partner. So there's $298,000 in the budget for that initiative. Anti-racism, inclusion, and diversity, there's $35,000 in the budget for that. So that includes both our share of the regional piece, but also $15,000 of that 35 is for organizational capacity, building awareness and training within the organization for staff, council, and committee members. The accessibility plan, we continue to implement that. There's $43,600 in the budget for that. That includes our share of the regional accessibility coordinator and also a half-time position to assist the town specifically with implementing the accessibility plan and incorporating accessibility into our projects. We continue to support community events, so there's $99,000 in the budget for Canada Day, Christmas on the Lahade, Harvest Moon, and the music on the riverbank. This budget has $252,000 in support for nonprofit organizations proposed. So there's grants, a total of $78,000. Sponsorships of $42.5, so $40,000 of that is the Health Services Foundation commitment that Council has made. I believe we're in year 4 or 5. And then there's tax exemptions for nonprofits equaling $131,000. We, through the budget, will provide for tax exemptions for low-income property owners, and there's $70,000 in the budget for that. And there's $32,500 proposed for support for the Pro Kids and Pro Fund programs that the town has. And these funds help remove financial barriers to youth as well as adults so that they can participate in activities and programs. We also invest in emergency response through this budget, and this year our fire is at 1.8, police at 4.9 net, and emergency response is $59,000, so that's REMO, and that's our share of that regional partnership. And this year we'll see park preservation initiatives continue with the Hemlock Roley Adelgit project. This will be the last year, so it will be completed, and there is funding for that, and it's $84,700 in our budget for that. And staff will be looking at what's next, because remember, this was buying us some time. So we'll be bringing forward a proposal for that. In terms of ensuring fiscal responsibility through this budget, there's $1.57 million going to wastewater reserves. And based on our 10-year capital plan, it could be much, much more. But this is important because it helps lessen the amount that we borrow for capital, and it also builds a fund that enables us to respond to emergencies with respects to wastewater. We continue to source grants, and this year, while we have a large capital budget at over 30 million, we also have $13.1 million in grants to help offset that. So that's a great number, and a lot of that is the DMAF and the provincial funding for our wastewater initiatives. And we had $885,000 in operating grants, and that excludes police funding or transfers. We'll continue to work on our asset management, and this year we'll bring forward the 3-year roadmap for council. We're looking at long-range budget tool and software investments to help with long-range operating budgets and enabling council to make better decisions on long-range budgets. Infrastructure charges and development charges. There's $125,000 in the budget to look at that, and that will be to bring forth charges that ensure that development pays for development. And this is funded through the Housing Accelerator Fund, so that $125,000 is grant funded. We continue to address our debt affordability by funding more capital from operating. So this year we have $2.3 million of capital being funded through operating, or the tax rate, as opposed to borrowing for that. So that lessens our future cost, because it always costs more to borrow than it does to use your operating budget. In terms of organizational excellence, the initiatives that will be undertaken as proposed in the budget are to look at the feasibility of the establishment of a wastewater utility, and that's part of council's overall wastewater strategy. Operations review. This year, in 25-26, we had funds for the operations review. That will be completed in the next few weeks, we're hoping, by the end of March, and presented to council probably late April. And then we'll have an implementation plan brought forward to say, here's the initiatives that we feel we can implement. Some may have budget impact, so they may have to be deferred a year. Others we may be able to implement without any budgetary impact. We'll continue to build our organizational capacity in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then, as I mentioned, there's $15,000 for that. Asset management continues, and long-range budget software will contribute to organizational excellence as well. And this year we also propose a new position, business process solution analyst position, which is really a position that would look at how we can use technology, software, to help improve efficiencies in how we do things. So it might be to automate some processes. It might be to just improve our service levels overall to our residents. So I'm going to hand it over to Kim. She's going to run you through the budget in a little bit more detail.
All right. The very first slide just gives you an indication. I know it's hard to find. The budget document is long in itself. But for the 26-27 year, currently we're showing a deficit of $306,730. Unlike other levels of government, we cannot budget for a deficit. So later in the presentation, we'll provide you with some options to address that deficit. The next slide, sorry, is this, or where do your tax dollars go? So it's just to give kind of a, if you broke the expenses down, what percentage of the revenue are taken up with each of the different categories within the budget. So noting some of the bigger ones would be police at 17.13%, wastewater's at 13.01%, and the mandatory contributions is at 9.1%. So those mandatory contributions are things like education and whatnot that we have to pay a set amount, and council can't change those budget amounts. So those are the larger categories. You can see some of the other ones, are much smaller, but just to give you an idea of the expenses as a percentage of revenue. Also a bit of a reality check that 84% of our revenue is from taxation, and then you can see the other categories of revenue being much smaller, such as transfers from reserve and our other revenue from own sources, sales of service and whatnot. They do contribute for sure, but they definitely are not a large portion of our revenue. I did want to note here, I guess, the very top one, special purpose tax, makes up about 2% of our revenue. And so I thought it's a good time to note that fiscal 27-28 will be the final year that we need to collect that special purpose tax. So we need the full amount this year, and in 27-28, the rate should be below 6 cents. So it'll be the last year, and we won't need the full 6 cents for that one. And that would, every year assessment drives that amount. And also we've built up a bit of a reserve for that so that we can make the future payments. That's why we're able to end the collection of that charge next year, because we've built up a reserve with the excess money we're getting due to assessment growth. So we're putting that in reserve. The payments don't stop on the principal and interest, but we'll have enough saved up. And so once we know how much the interest we've earned in 26-27, I'll have a better idea of what the rate will need to be next year. But final year next year, not this budget year we're working on. Again, the mandatory contributions, which was something that I just mentioned, there are 3 things. Education contribution, which is based on our uniform assessment times an education rate. So that just due to assessment growth goes up by $215,000 this year. The Regional Library Board, there's been no change that we're aware of. That's driven at the provincial level, so our contribution to the local library is $66,500. And assessment services, I think we've estimated, because we don't have the actual amount yet, so that's budgeted for a 3% increase. And again, those are ones we contribute to based on other agreements. Apologies, that should say 26-27 at the top for wastewater rates. So again, on February 23rd, I did a presentation for council specifically on the wastewater rate separately. So we discussed putting a 20% increase in the operating budget so that we are continuing to transfer monies to reserves for emergencies and to also fund capital that doesn't require us to borrow. So at the end of March 31st, 2027, we're estimating there'll be $4.89 million in that wastewater reserve, but also keeping in mind the capital budget for 27-28 shows using $2 million of that reserve towards the wastewater treatment plant expansion. So even though it's getting quite high, keeping in mind that will go back down with the expansion of that plant. So essentially there'll be about just under $3 million that's not allotted to a project. We could potentially see that balance be slightly lower, but we're quite aware that a small emergency repair can cost us $1 million on the treatment plant quite easily, or any other of the wastewater assets. The estimated principal and interest repayments on wastewater-related debt alone is $557,000 in 26-27. And as you're aware, there's significant wastewater capital in future years, so that number will be ever increasing. And wastewater rates are covering capital and operating costs, with the exception of some administration costs that are not charged out to wastewater at this time. So based on a 20% overall increase in wastewater rates, this would see the residential rates go up by 14%. A number of the commercial, hotel, and education categories going up by 20%. We'll see large industrial increase by 75%, and hospital increasing by 30% on their both base amount and their number of beds. So it's kind of a mixture of rates to get closer to kind of consumption. So during the February 23rd council meeting where that was presented, we did look at kind of water consumption versus what percentage some of these categories were contributing in the sewer rate, and just trying to get that more balanced. Certainly those rates in that presentation, we showed you what 15 and 20% would look like, and it can be 15%. You'll just see the contribution to the wastewater reserve likely go down. So looking at the budget overall, there is a 26-27 baseline of $34,183,624. We have $3,075,084 of additions and $1,368,737 of deletions for the overall budget of $35,889,971. Again, keeping in mind, we still have $306,000 of deficit to resolve. So those numbers, some of those numbers will change. We just wanted to go through some of the significant baseline changes with you. These are things that are kind of in that baseline number of 34 million. And there's lots of little increases, so we just wanted to focus you on some of the larger ones. The one being the education contribution, which has gone up by 215,000. General risk management of 15,000. The main reason why we've increased that one is just we're seeing a larger number of claims. And even if we are not responsible, we still have to hire an adjuster to do the investigation so that we have supporting documentation. So because of that larger volume, we're seeing that our budget's probably a little lower than it needs to be. Of course, we have annual either CPI increases or increases that are part of collective agreements. And so for non-union, step increases in CPI adjustment are estimated at $268,000. For police, combination of CPI or collective agreement increases of $169,000. And the QP collective agreement of approximately $157,000. So those are just our increases in salaries and wages that come as part of various agreements. Capital from operating wastewater. So in the past, and Tammy mentioned earlier that we have a 2.3 million contribution operating from capital. I've separated the wastewater, so they are contributing to their own capital separate. So you'll see on the town side it's 2.1 million, and there's an extra 241,000, I think, of contribution from wastewater. So that's an increase in wastewater of $86,000. So not significant, but as we get that reserve comfortable where it's at, we'll be able to use more of the wastewater rate for that. The Des Brisets Museum, there's a reduced administration fee revenue resulting from the closure of the wild carding mill. The LCLC, their capital grant increased by $272,000 this year over last year, and their operating grant increased by $29,720 over last year. And I believe we've invited the LCLC to council next Monday so that they can present their budget. And the last item being that our tipping fee based on the EPR has decreased our expense by $168,000. And that's the extended producer responsibility. So previously we paid tipping fees for blue bags and things like that. So we are no longer responsible for that. So there are savings there. So that's an overall decrease or increase, sorry, to the baseline of $1,072,925. There are others, increases and decreases, but they're smaller in nature, and these are really the ones that are impactful. The next section of the budget goes through the additions and deletions. So each department's going to speak to you about their particular additions, deletions, and perhaps any specifics on their actual budget page. So you'll note at the top of the slide where it says page 22, that's page 22 in the bottom right-hand corner of the actual budget document, if you want to be able to look at that page while staff might be discussing that. So first up is admin.
Okay. So the baseline stays fairly consistent. We do have a few deletions within the admin section that we'll go over in a minute. But in terms of additions, you'll see in the revenue side, we have $99,000 proposed. And then when you look at the first line of salaries, we have $109,000 for the privacy officer. So the privacy officer was previously funded through Energize Bridgewater. So for the last 2 years, that position's been funded through that budget. With Energize Bridgewater winding down, the privacy work now switches over to focus on town. Not that the privacy officer's been doing that all along, but now it's a town-funded position. It's being proposed that this would be a position that would be shared through the Municipal Joint Services Board. And so there'd be a secondment there, and because of that, the partners would be offsetting the cost of that. So that's the 99,000 would be the revenue coming in from the partners to offset the privacy officer's position. So they remain an employee of the town, be seconded to the Joint Services Board, and funded by the partners. And I believe the town's share of that is around 10% of that position, given that a lot of the heavy lifting's been done in the last few years by the town in developing the privacy framework. So that explains the revenue and it explains the expense. So it's just a small amount of the salary remaining for the town to fund. And we have a deletion in revenue of 12,500, and that was a grant that we had for asset management. In terms of some of the larger additions, the sponsorship, the 40,000, I mentioned that was year 4 or 5 of the Brighter Days campaign. So that was a commitment that council made. And then the others are related to primarily the new positions being created with the, there's another with the privacy officer's position being there. So before those were funded through Energize Bridgewater. We have 65,000 for consulting proposed as an addition, and that is related to regional growth management. So the committee and the councils need to decide next steps. This would provide funding that would enable resources to be acquired to assist the parties and fleshing out that next step and what that should look like. And it is all built on the assumption that there would be sharing of that by the District of Lunenburg as well. So, but it gives you a dollar amount to work with if it's decided to flesh out those next steps. The next slide deals primarily with economic development. It's under admin, and this here you can see the additions relate for land sales and marketing. Relate the 190,000 primarily to Exit 12A. So we have 125,000 for that full-time equivalent due to that project management. Plus, we also have funds in there to enable survey work, appraisals, marketing, and signage for sales, and 20,000 for the master plan updates for Exit 12A. The next line under salaries, there's 87,482 proposed. And this is where the tourism and events coordinator position is. So we're planning on the end of the first quarter, so starting July with that new position in place, so there'd be 66,000 for that. And then the continuation of the existing part-time position until we get to the point of having that new position in place. So that makes up the 87.4. And then there's supplies, hardware, travel, cell phones, those are all associated with those positions. And then we go down to consulting services, and you can see that here there's 30,000 proposed for 20,000 of that for Exit 12A consulting to assist in the development of that conceptual plan. We use consulting services to assist us with Phase 1A. This would be using that same type of expertise for the conceptual plan piece. And then we have 10,000 for business development and infill strategy, which would be looking at our downtown area and areas within town for that development strategy. And then there's 18,000 for marketing and promotion, and you can see that some of that, there's 3,000 for marketing levy promotional material that's funded through the levy. And there's regional marketing funding as well as business showcase writer funding proposed within the budget. EDI, 15,000, that's for the training. That was referenced earlier in the presentation. And then because the town is the host for the branch library, the town is responsible for the facility cost of the branch portion of the library, not the headquarters, but the branch. And that's located on the ground floor, or the main floor, in the LCLC, the library area there. And they have requested new carpet. So that is a town responsibility. So there's $50,000 for carpet replacement proposed in the budget for that. And then these are the deletions, which the part-time events coordinator is the one that would have been in the baseline, and it's being deleted because we're proposing to move to that full-time tourism and events coordinator in the second quarter, so we'd be removing salary associated with that. The asset management software is being removed simply because we need to really assess our needs before making that investment. And so we're going to remove it. It'll appear in future years. Legal services has been removed because we're done the collective agreement. And then the next $32,000 for computer software updates and licensing. We were able to delete that $32,000 because we moved to the cloud, which was about $13,000 or thereabouts. But we've also reduced our annual licensing fee by, I think, $15,000 by moving to the cloud. So we're able to reduce the baseline by 32 to take that out. So that saved us some money. The $100,000 is removed for consulting. That was the one-time operations review. And then the rest are related to economic development. So land sales, we took that out of the baseline, but we also added in money for land sales too. Same with consulting services, the tourism strategy, we took that out, $25,000. That full-time position would be responsible for the development of that. Branding strategy's been removed, and the contingency, we had some funds in there for salary review implementation, and QP there was a contingency in there because we weren't too sure where the negotiations were going to go. So those have been removed, and that totals $195,000. And last year we had $20,000 in our budget for regional EDI initiatives. This year we've taken that and allocated it to $15,000 to internal, and the rest is just our share of the salary portion of the coordinator. So we reduced that budget by $20,000. So $525,000 in cuts. And then events. This is where you'll see the proposal to add the $25,000 for the major events fund, and that would be funded through the marketing levy. So there would be no tax revenue used for that. Totally funded from that.
We need like 2 remotes.
Keeps us from
Put that in the budget.
Get your steps in.
relaxed in our
I don't put that in this year's budget. Maybe next year's, Stacey.
All right, so we're just going to go through some of the finance additions and deletions. Won't take me very long. You'll note the transfers from operating reserve of $216,330. That's a result of the fact that in 2016, a debenture was issued with the request having a slight error. Normally, we'd borrow over 10 or 15 years. In this case, it was set, I think, for 25 years, so it resulted in a balloon payment at the 10-year mark, or you can refinance it. When it was identified, what happened was $21,633 was put in reserve every year, so this could just be paid off when the balloon payment became due. So we're just transferring that money back in from the reserve that's been building up over the past 10 years. In addition to that, you'll see in the expenditure side that we have the business process analyst salary is falling under the finance area for now at $102,630. Contractual services is for business process improvement. So a large part of that is budget software. We did do an RFP in 25-26, but it failed. There were no successful proponents identified. And we'd hoped to use alternative procurement to proceed with that. But our time and attendance transition had taken up most of our resources during the year. So we would like to get that implemented, and having the business process analyst there to assist with identifying the possible options and assisting with RFPs and evaluations and things like that. There should be enough room there as well in that budget to allow us to work on workflow. So being part of that maybe Laserfiche, and we would look to evaluate the best options, but we do know that other municipalities are using Laserfiche workflow to automate approval processes and whatnot. So there's a lot less paper shuffling around town hall. And so that's all looking to be process improvement, become more efficient. So that budget's at 50,000. You'll notice the next one being IT support costs, $50,000 to contribute to a new phone system. That's being looked at jointly by the MJSB partners. So MJSB does not have this included in their budget, and they just requested each of the municipalities to budget for it separately. So, for example, Modal has budgeted also for a transition to a phone system. We have a number of, they've been evaluating a number of different phone system options, and so we just want to be able to have that in our budget for 26-27 so that project can proceed. We do have a work plan from MJSB, so this would include any other software needs we have for that. Temporary interest. As you know, we have a very significant capital carry forward as well as 26-27 capital budget. And what happens is from time to time, we may have to use a line of credit, or the interest or the balances in our bank account go very low. And so this is to ensure that we have enough budget to carry us through those times where we might need to temporarily borrow. As we spend millions of dollars on projects and can't finance them until they're complete, oftentimes we are temporarily funding them until that comes into play. So we've just estimated some additional interest at 5%, and we've budgeted $261,000 for that. The debenture repayment addition is a little bit of new debenture, but it's also mostly that balloon payment that I discussed earlier above that we have the money in reserve to cover. The transfer to reserve for EPR savings. So the extended producer responsibility has two components to it. There is a tipping fee reduction, which just means we'll have less expense owing to MJSB for tipping fees. But in addition to that, we have a contract with GE, and we pay them so much per year to collect around town. That includes the recyclables that now belong to Circular Materials, so they are reimbursing us on a per stop basis per month. So there are savings or reimbursement for that as well. So the net of both of those two things is saving us about $354,000 per year in total between tipping fee reduction and recovery of the garbage collection contract. Staff felt it was important for council to determine how that was reflected in the budget. We just didn't want to have this big savings and it just kind of disappeared in the budget and it didn't stand out. So at this time, we've recorded that as a transferred operating reserve. It's a significant savings. It can go in reserve to be used for future things. It can be used to offset the deficit. It's really, since it was such a significant item as compared to saving $15,000 on Laserfish licenses, this was one that was more identified as being council directing staff on how that should be used. And then we have a deletion, which was the funds we had set aside for iPads and other technology needed for our time and attendance system. The next category being police, and the one after that being fire, and they will both be here next Monday night, I believe, to present their information. So the next one up is engineering. So I think Matt's going to come up for those. Sideways. Right.
That one?
Yep.
All right. Of course, I have my notes backwards to the slide, so I'm gonna, with respect to engineering, the additions and deletions. So one of a recurring theme for most of our facilities is renewing our fire and intrusion alarm monitoring upgrades. So there's the replacement of those. Safety clothing, another recurring theme would be the provision of fitted hearing protection for our staff. So depending on the department or division, there's money allocated for fitted hearing protection. consulting engineering services. So what we're seeing there is through the development of our asset management program, we're also, with our department, given the changes over the last couple of years, we need some assistance with some infrastructure assessments, specifically with bridges and drainage. So we have an allotment of consulting services for this. And as well as in preparation of our 10-year capital plan, there's quite a few intersection improvements in those. So if we want to do additional traffic counts specific to those, in preparation of those infrastructure improvements, we'll be doing those as well. Heavy in the engineering side is the equipment upgrades or equipment replacement. So every year, one of our trucks gets a new lift gate for material handling, plate tampers, etc. That are used around town. And then for traffic control, because we do supply that service as much as we can in-house. So a light bar gets fixed to one of our vehicles. We did purchase, we're waiting a new loader. Tires were not as part of the tender replacement set, so that is in the budget for when the new loader comes. Flail mower, which we use on cutting grass along our trails and our open ditches. We were able to source a retrofit for our existing one to save about half the cost of a new one. So the new one's around 45 to 50, the replacement is around 20. So that is in the budget. Radio maintenance, new handhelds are getting quite old, so we need to start replacing those. With respect to the proposed fleet as part of the 10-year as part of the capital plan for this year, we have one line item for all of the equipment. So as they are procured and become online, we'll create a new budget, operations budget. So you'll see if we get a new backhoe, it'll have a $10,000 operating budget, or a compressor, $1,000, etc. Facility tools, we do have a new facility tech with expertise in plumbing, so we'll be trying to outfit that to rely on in-house services rather than contracted. Public Works Garage, a DEF tank or diesel exhaust fuel tank, so instead of doing it manually for each individual, putting it in through the little containers, we'll have a large container for easy fuel up, easy maintenance, as well as bulk supply of it for reduced cost. We do need to fix some heat to the washroom at the Public Works Garage, and again, the fire intrusion alarm needs to be replaced. Recurring theme would be the addition of a new custodian that will provide services specifically to Des Brisé and the outdoor pool. However, it will be a backup for the existing custodian if they need to take vacation or sick. I've already covered the additional contracted services and traffic control. We do not have currently a spare push button in place, so we do need to acquire one in case any of the older units go down. And we have the additional line of temporary traffic lights for the King Street or Beanos Bridge. So at this point, we are trying to negotiate with Nova Scotia Department of Public Works on another solution that will take place, we hope to take effect this year. So I put the full budget as if we're sticking with temporary lights. However, we're trying to work on a different solution. But it is taking some time to work out those details. We're hoping that it will at least be 60% of that cost at the minimum, or maximum, sorry.
And that solution would free up the flow of traffic, we hope?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so there would be the removal of lights.
Yeah, okay.
All the while still maintaining pedestrian access.
Okay, thank you.
And make sure, I didn't go by my notes, so I want to make sure I covered everything, sorry. Yeah, all right. Where do I point this thing? Okay. Where am I? Oh, there's just the deletions, so with respect to town hall work, town hall trim work, union negotiations that were completed, any equipment that was surplus in a given year, where the operations accounts are being deleted. Again, we usually have a lift gate and a light bar every year on a new truck, because those trucks that we dispose of, we can't necessarily use that equipment on new trucks, or we add it to the fleet. We did purchase the core drill for any of the infrastructure pipe projects that we're doing. And in terms of the storm-related, the specific work on Alexander, that was referred to do other work on Glen Allen, and we continue to monitor that situation. It's not required at this time, so it was deleted. Wastewater. In terms of the revenue, so we did receive half funding to complete the water modeling, wastewater modeling, and the purchase of new flow monitors, as well as complete the utility. So it's being deleted. However, they're still in the wastewater budget in terms of the next year or this coming work. We're still going to continue with wastewater modeling. It is important that we stay on top of our wastewater capacity issues. So water modeling will be important, and I believe it's noted there at $25,000 and it's a one-time cost. And the utility is also in there as well, because we are, as covered earlier, looking at the feasibility of utility. Outside of those additions, we have replacement of cell phones, intrusion alarms, the custodian, which I've covered, the hearing protection. Kim has already talked about some of our wastewater initiatives and the new debt we have to carry for ones that are completed. I believe that's the right wording, right?
Yes.
There you go. All right, and then the deletions that I covered above with respect to the water and wastewater modeling. We've completed the work on our SCADA system, and we did install the wastewater treatment plant ramp for the garage building for materials handling. I don't know when I should pause in case there's any questions. All right. Solid waste. Kim's already covered this one in terms of the additional revenue associated with circular materials. In terms of the one-time expenses, we have new waste receptacles for the downtown. We are seeing that some of our units are quite heavily damaged, or they're older, getting harder to maintain or empty, and possibly use. So we have tried a few different solutions. So in this case, this purchase is based on buying two similar units that's out front of the town hall, fully stainless steel. They're very safe and accessible, provided by a local supplier. Transit. So we're fortunate to continue to receive grants, specifically with respect to our extended hours, as well as the PTAP that we usually put in reserve for purposes of buying the new buses or installation of shelters, and things like that. The additions, we are looking to update our transit tracker this year because we are working on an older system, so it's time for an upgrade there, and we are anticipating the purchase of 2 new buses as we work through our negotiations with Modal, and so there's operations accounts associated with 2 new buses. Parking lots. So similar to our intrusion alarm system, we need to upgrade our pay stations. They are under 3G, and we're going to upgrade those, the modems to 5. And we have our annual allotment to resurfacing in the town center parking lot and creating an accessible parking spot in the town center lot. And the deletion would be, we've completed the study and the report's forthcoming to council, hopefully in early spring. Parks. So again, just keep your custodian to mainly. We've heard the public rave about having public washrooms at the Shippers Landing, but there is the desire to have them operate year-round. Operating year-round does require cleaning and daily inspection, which isn't in our current staffing that we can do. So we had been relying on contracted services, doing a great job, but it's more cost-effective to look at having a custodian do that work. As well as I said earlier, to do other facilities and serve as a backup to the other custodian. Last year, we did notice when we took out the docks from Shippers Landing, they're getting quite old and they do require replacement. So this is year 1 of 3 to replacement of the docks. we still have one more transit shelter to install. Sorry, I said transit shelter, not, I didn't catch that mistake. That would be the shelter at Shipyard's Landing. We are trying to get it done before the end of March, but if it's not, there is money for to complete that. So, sorry, that should not say transit shelter.
It does just say fourth shelter.
Yeah, that mine's, this one's this one. Okay, now I'm off there. So we're doing some, the stairs at the Lake Ball Field do need to be replaced, so we have some funds for that. Finishing the park signage at both Vinburn and Glen Allen, as well as replacing the signs for the Veterans Memorial Bridge, and then the new town sign as well. Tires here, new tires for the new lighting and hearing protection, which I've covered. Then we deleted $8,000 because we completed the refurbishment of the pump station that services Kingston Field. And based on staffing, we were actually able to reduce our sanitation required at our parks because we're able to complete more work in-house. And with respect to the arena, there is a heating upgrade that is required for the building. Custodian I've already spoke about is another facility. With respect to the cemetery, we're in the final stages of the digitization project, and I believe that means approximately 16 more weeks just to complete. So that budget is based on that. We are looking to install a heat pump in the garage, and custodian is already been discussed, and the rod-on mower, which we completed, we purchased last year, is being deleted. And now on the point.
Deputy Mayor?
One of the initial slides that CAO went through at the very beginning, it said that Parks Development was $708,000. What does that include?
So that would include the capital, so we have over $500,000 for the Generations Active Park in there. There's the Wimburn Park development of 20. I believe that might be it for capital, and then there's the operating, so all of the smaller amounts that are in the operating budget for park.
Right, so what we're seeing in here is
Yeah.
a piece of it, and then
Yes.
also the capital. Okay, thank you.
So, for the planning and development services, additions and deletions, the big part obviously is the housing accelerator fund. So that is the amount anticipated of revenue that we need to offset the expense in the operating budget. So that's funding, all of the different expenses for the Housing Accelerator Fund. So from the staff, summer student, addition of, I'll go on the expense, I'll go through, but the $100,000 for the second portion of the grant to SODA for the preservation of affordable housing, and also for the completion of the housing action plan items. So the permitting, land for housing, development charges, etc. It also funds some of, it doesn't balance, so if you're looking in the line items in the budget, there's more revenue coming in because it's funding the items that Matt just went through that are in the engineering budget. So it's funding, all the revenues coming into planning, but it's supporting the broader range of Housing Accelerator Fund activities through the budget. And then the provincial conditional grant is for the co-op education incentive grant, of which we just heard we're only receiving half of that. So we received one. That was one of the areas of provincial cuts, so I'm very grateful that we received one of the two positions that we applied for. In the expenses, that's $16,000 addition is for, specifically for a summer student to support housing accelerator activities this summer. And then the 100,000 for SODA. The building records scanning project is year 2 of our permit record scanning project, where we're looking at all of our paper records and digitizing them. So that is for a person who has been doing that work. It's very important to continue. And then the wayfinding, that addition is for the second year of business park wayfinding and signage. And the addition for special planning initiatives is related to the park improvement plan implementation, so a small amount of budget beyond what's already been planned for Windburn for that. And then we are rebudgeting $5,000 to support the renewal of the community energy investment plan. That work was initiated back in 2024, and then it has been on pause for the last couple of years. It was with all of the energized work. The sustainability planner was otherwise occupied, so as they come back into the community development department, we're hoping to finalize that work that had been started. Okay, so recreation and culture. New this year is an integrated rec and culture budget to reflect the direction to integrate the 2 services into one. So it no longer shows that transfer to balance the budget in the museum budget, because it's now one collective rec and culture budget. And that had been shown separately before, because the museum was budgeted separately as it was a commission. So it needed to, revenue and expense needed to fully match. But where there's now the direction to integrate, we pulled it all together because positions are supporting across everything. It's not so siloed, and it is more effective in doing our work. So you see a small deletion in the community garden donations and sponsorships. That's project completion. We are also wrapping up our Hemlock Coleodelgic project, so our contract to provide that service for inventorying and assessing the District of Lunenburg's parks is coming to a close, so that's coming off the books. And you'll also see that deletion of the administrative fee that we received to operate the wild carding mill on behalf of the province. So the provincial cuts were significant to us, so there's also a decrease in the CMAP, the Community Museum Assistance Grant. That budget has been adjusted. It's not shown as a deletion here. The result. Okay. Here we go. Sorry. My notes are not catching up to my words. All right, so in the expenditure side, you'll see the addition of the $33,000. That is the request of the food bank for the grants, a grant to support their expansion. So that's that they've asked for 40 less their taxes for tax exemption. So that approximated about $33,000. I think the actual ask has come in to grants to organizations, and that's $32,000 is what they in their actual request. So that's an addition. You'll see an addition in the salaries, and that is to support a new position for the Municipal Physical Activity Leadership Program, program of the province. So that funding for the wage subsidy was not impacted by the recent provincial budget cuts. It's other grant funding that was impacted. You'll see an increase, or an addition rather, of $7,500 for the Pro Kids program, and that's increased funding to support increased need in the community. There's also a request to increase summer recreation salaries, and again, that's to add additional summer staff to increase the program offering, to increase the demand that we saw last year for the programming that was being offered. The custodial position that Matt introduced and is woven throughout his budget, 50% of that position is here in the rec and culture budget. The museum facility is being actively used 6 days a week with programming open to the public and staff working out of there. It requires dedicated custodial support. It's been receiving that through contracted services that started last July and have been maintained because we're having many more people through and really need that level of service. You'll also see $13,000 addition for maintenance and repairs, and that is also to the museum facility. There's a small rebalancing of the HVAC system following all of the great work that was just wrapped up on the building upgrades for energy retrofits and the efficiency of the building. There's a small bit of work remaining, as well as some electrical. We discovered some electrical issues in the gallery, and those need to be rectified. On the deletions, that's all Hemlock will indulge in as we wrap up that project. There's still a small portion of the project that's carrying forward into this fiscal year, but those are all the deletions. Okay. So for the pool, you'll see the deletion of grant revenue and expense for $27,500, and that is signaling the completion of a grant that we received, a recreation facility development grant from the province. So we received that 2 years ago to do safety and accessibility upgrades at the pool, and the final portion of the work was completed this winter. So it's looking incredibly great over at the pool now, with brand new accessible door, with improved flooring and paint, and it's looking very sharp. So you'll also see a small addition that is an allocation for custodial services. We had contracted services there last year, so if we have this new custodial position, they will also be responsible for cleaning up the pool. And then there's a small deletion of canteen purchases because the LCLC, now that they're providing not only the lifeguarding services, but they've been doing their day-to-day management. So last year they ran the canteen, so they're doing all the purchases. That means they're also receiving revenue as an incentive. And finally, with the carding mill, it's a zero-sum game. The province has determined it is to be permanently closed, so this is showing that it is going to zero.
Can you, just going back to the recreation budget, can you just give a little detail, maybe some examples on what the MPAL position would do?
Yeah, so the physical activity leadership program with the province, so that's MPAL, it would directly support a wide range of our activities, from implementation of park improvement plan, playground enhancement, like the commitments of the open space plan. It would help, with any future recreation amenities. It's really about community activation, providing for more unstructured opportunities for physical movement in your daily life. This program has been running across, sort of supported by the province, by the provincial government, across municipalities throughout the province, as more of a prevention, getting people up and moving. It's part of the Let's Get Moving strategy from 2012. And so part of it is we have lots of great ideas around placemaking and vibrancy, and then we're lacking having all the necessary hands to carry it off, to do the work. And so having a dedicated position means there's somebody to do, while the other staff, we've been getting busier and busier. And so we can't continue to have all of these small things being done off the side of multiple plates. And it would be very beneficial to have that dedicated set of hands to assist in doing these types and jumping on the types of activities that the community's been asking for. So some of the things that we have managed to do through MPAL have been the Storybook Trail, implementing that, but we haven't been good the last year. We have not been able to plan all the books, swap out the books, maintain it, because we don't have the capacity to actually do that. That's a great example of something that was really great. It was bringing people out into Glenallen Park. People were really enjoying that, but then we've run out of capacity to keep that going. We have a program coordinator, but that's for structured programming, and it's now the Rec and Culture Program Coordinator role. You'll notice we've been running more programs and attracting a lot of interest in our programs. Our number of cancellations have dramatically dropped in terms of not having enough people to make the program go, and our revenue has really increased from our programming. That's the program coordinator's role, is to do that. The MPAL is more of the unstructured opportunity to walk you through Walk with the Dock or Walk with Council were a couple of initiatives that happened a number of years ago. We haven't been able to carry that on either because of all the work required to actually pull together the more structured programming. We tried having it in one role, and it was impossible.
Deputy Mayor.
The need for 3 additional summer staff, where did that come from?
That came from, last summer. We ran the half-day camps plus in the mornings and had a wait list for every single week. And then ran drop-in programming in different parks around town through the afternoons, as well as pulling off fresh air films every Friday night. And so it came from the ability to maintain that and perhaps offer more spaces certainly for the organized half-day camp program.
Can I follow up
Yep.
on that? So if those 3 positions weren't added, we would just stay at what we currently do? Okay, thank you.
Councilor Picchu.
Yes. If I may just ask about the outdoor pool and staffing, have we allocated more janitorial hours for, is that under the staffing by any chance? Or does it go under maintenance?
Under the
Custodial.
Okay.
So that's in the additions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, because I know, like, it wasn't the responsibility of the staff of the LCLC to do the cleaning, so I'm just wondering
No,
if we
this-
had more hours there for,
Right. This past year, we had an external contractor
Okay.
come in on a daily basis because the year before,
mhm.
the LCLC was going to do it and then something fell through, so then the staff, it didn't work 2
Okay.
seasons ago. Last season, we had an external contractor on a daily basis.
Okay.
And it would be if an internal should, but a custodial position would be.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
On the Pro Kids, I'm sure you probably don't have this in front of you. Can you send us information on what the increases have been in the last couple of years? Because there have been increases,
We're
but I can't
preparing
remember.
all of that too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so on to the next part. As promised early in the presentation, I talked about providing you, council, with some options to balance the budget, because right now we have a deficit of about $306,000. So obviously, the first one is to increase revenue, being one of the options, and add 1 cent on the residential and commercial tax rate, totaling $105,000 of new revenue. That would take approximately 3 cents increase on the tax rate, being an option. Another option is to reduce expenses by the $306,000. There were several items that are referred to the budget process by council from other requests throughout the year, one being the food bank request, the request from the library for flooring replacement, and budgets from other organizations and partnerships such as MJSB, LCLC, and so on, who will be here next Monday. Another option is to look at reducing expenses related to the reduced revenue from the provincial budget cuts. Most of that affected the recreation and culture category in the form of reduced revenue, so there are not necessarily offsetting expense cuts on those. And the last thing would be using some operating reserves to supplement the budget to cover the $306,000. So those are just some general thoughts. We'll get into some more specifics. So staff did come up with a list for council as options. Obviously, it's not the only things you can choose. You've had a presentation tonight on all the additions, deletions, and changes to the baseline. So everything is an option, but we thought we might summarize some of those for you. The ones on the first page we call less impactful, but they're not necessarily resulting in a decrease in service level. So the first one on the list being the library carpet at $50,000. The second one being the EPR reserve transfer, so the $354,000 of savings as a result of the circular materials agreement could not be transferred to reserve and be kept in the budget. Grants to organizations, so the request from the food bank of approximately $33,000 is an option. The regional growth management, we could continue to not have that resource and continue with a limited staff dedication to that process. The accessibility coordinator of a half full-time equivalent, so we could just continue with the status quo for now. There's a number of different projects that could be deferred, so digitization of the cemetery project is partially complete, so that could be put off, but will come back in the budget in future years, as well as wayfinding signs and other park signage. And the last one being the rec and culture staff, the 3 positions that Jessica just discussed for summer students. And so those total $616,000 as potential cost savings. We do have a second list, and these are a higher impact as a result in a service level impact. And the first one being the QP janitor that you've heard through various parts of the presentation. The pool, the Desbrizet Museum building, and a number of the different other facilities that the town owns. And so that reduction, you could possibly go from a full-time to a half-time person, and that would save you $30,000, or not to have that position would save about $60,000. The phone system replacement could be a potential cut at $50,000. It is a project that we are doing with the partner municipalities, but it could be deferred. Our phone system just isn't capable of doing all the things we need it to do. So that's why we have been looking at that, and MJSB has put the effort in to evaluating our options in 25-26. Business park land sales marketing, a full-time equivalent or consultant at $125,000. It could be reduced or eliminated, but it would impact the progress on land sales at Exit 12A. The business process analyst, again, it's really important for efficiency and modernization of processes here at the town, including the bus tracking software and budget software and so on. If you were looking to reduce that business process analyst, we might also look at the budget and other software that they would be assisting with. So that could be a potential savings of $60,000, but it leaves us stuck with kind of the old method we're doing of using a model that was never intended for long-term planning, but is the one we have right now. So that could save $60,000. The MPAL position of $74,712. Again, could save some costs. There will be a loss of a partial wage subsidy going along with that, but it is an option. Jessica just explained what that role would be doing. We could reduce funding for Pro Kids by $7,500, but again, it just reduces our ability to ensure that the youth have options to attend other programming. Or we could reduce the record scanning position, which is about $60,000, but it would seriously impact our ability to get our paper records in electronic format. A lot of that is related to building, planning, inspection that we do with Modal, but also gets all our records electronically as well, instead of being in paper filing cabinets. So those total $533,000.
Councilor,
I'm sorry if this was covered, your record scanning for $60,000, would that complete? Or is that an ongoing?
We just have a casual position doing that right now, so it's not a permanent position. We would just extend that role for a year and hope that we could get the remaining records done. Okay. I know we're doing it by letter. I don't know which letter we're on now, but
I think. Is it E? Wait, there's a lot of street names. It goes by street name, right? So there's a lot, obviously, of A, B, C, D.
So no guarantees that would be done by the end of next fiscal year?
That's the objective, because
Okay.
we're moving from a half-time to a full-time, and so it'd be dedicated 35 hours a week to do that.
Okay.
And then after that, it would be just ongoing maintenance that staff could do.
Okay, thank you.
Moving to a little different direction, and that's the operating reserve budget. So we're starting the fiscal year up with approximately 23 million in operating reserves. We're anticipating to earn about 200,000 of interest income on those reserves during the year. It might be a bit low if you looked at it as a percentage, but sometimes we have to borrow from our own reserves to keep our checking account afloat while we're working on capital projects. We do keep all the interest income we earn in operating reserves in a separate interest reserve so that we can keep track of exactly what's been earned in that reserve. And then once it becomes a significant balance, then council can choose to use that for funding an initiative, for example. We have a 25% of our niche sales going in the reserve. So in the past, we were not allocating any of the revenue from the sale of columbarium spaces. And so now we are taking 25% of those sales and putting in a reserve so that when we need to purchase the next module for that, then we do have the funds set aside to pay for that. In addition to that, we mentioned the balloon payment on the debenture. So one final time in 26-27, the 21,633 will go in, and then the entire amount will come back out to make that balloon payment. We have a number of capital projects that were being funded from operating in 25-26, and so we have to move that money into the reserve so it's still there and available to fund those capital projects when they're complete. We have other funding set aside for the business park. So there's a business park expansion reserve. So we have not finalized that exit project with the province. So once we do, those funds will come out to pay for our portion of that project. Just some other small amounts. The undesignated operating reserve, 5,083,000 being used from that. And I have a note somewhere of what that's for. We have $3 million is allocated for covering part of the cost of exit 12A. We have $1 million for the cost of St. Philip Street being covered by the undesignated reserve. And the water tower, there's a commitment of $415,000 in the capital budget to be paid from that undesignated reserve. So while it's called undesignated, some of it is truly designated in the capital budget. And so that amounts to $5 million in the current 26-27 capital budget, either through 26-27 or carry forwards. We have the reserve or transfer to the wastewater reserve that's coming from the wastewater operating it says 1.1 here, but that was from when we were at 15% the first time I had the budget done, so it's actually 1.5 million now. I'll update that for the next version. We have funding coming out of the wastewater reserve to pay for capital projects of 487,000. Some other small amounts just for smart cities to clear that reserve out, as that project will be winding up in September of 2026. We have the special purpose tax reserve. So as I mentioned, we are collecting more in special purpose tax each year than the principal and interest payments. So we're putting that in reserve to make those future payments. And so for 26-27, that's 236,000. And then the EPR savings of 354,000. So that would leave the operating reserve with a balance of just over $17 million as of March 31st, 2027. The next page is the capital reserve. So a lot less happens in the capital reserve. So it has a starting balance of $3.9 million. We have annual gas tax funding that we receive. We are budgeting to use almost $1.6 million of the capital, most of that being gas tax. We earned a bit of interest income on those reserves, leaving $3.2 million in that capital reserve at the end of the year. We tend not to allocate a lot of transfers into the capital, as it has more restrictions on how it can be used. For example, it can't be used for operating expenses. So the only things that tend to go in there are gas tax, which is required to be in its own reserve. And when we sell any capital asset or land, the proceeds from the sale of those has to go into this reserve. So For example, as we sell lots in 12A area, the proceeds from the sale of those will go in the capital reserve and build that balance up. And then again, council can choose how and when to use those funds through the budgeting process or a motion to use them for a special project. Got ahead of myself. So for the operating reserve, just kind of looking at kind of our own policies and kind of what the trends are for benchmarking out there. There's not a whole lot. I know a lot of municipalities, we all ask each other kind of what is your target? So our operating reserve policy says we set a minimum target of 20% of general operating expenses to be maintained within our operating reserve. So for 26-27, that 17 million ending balance gets us at 51.9%. So obviously a very healthy operating reserve. For the capital reserve side for 26-27, we're only going to bid 8.9%, and our capital reserve fund policy says we'll be at least 10%. We tend not to worry about that too much, as we know we are over our minimum threshold in the operating reserve, and we are just really, we could put more in the capital reserve to meet the 10% threshold, but then we have less flexibility in what those funds can be used for. And with development at Exit 12A and the proceeds of those sales going in there, that'll boost that balance up eventually. So we could get to that minimum by policy, but there's no real pressure to do that right now. If operating reserve and capital were both under, then I would be more concerned. We won't go through the capital budget in detail. We presented to council on December 8th, January 12th, and January 26th, the capital budget in much detail. So this is just more of a reminder. So any of the public that are watching could go back to those meeting dates and see those presentations. But also just to remind you, we've done that. We've looked at anything that council wished to be moved around, so we can certainly still continue to discuss the capital budget. I'm just not going to present it in detail. The main things to note here is for the 10-year capital plan, we have $54 million for wastewater treatment plant over 10 years. And for wastewater projects, we have over 81 million over the 10 years for capital projects. So those are fairly significant, and they're the most significant categories within the 10-year capital plan. Again, I'm always the bad news carrier, but the projected debt ratios, in the year 30-31, we are certainly hitting a target or a level of debt service that's well beyond where we hope to be. We know that 15% is relatively safe threshold to be under, and in 27-28 we are already going to be exceeding that. And then once we get to 30-31, we are well over 30%. I always have the caveat that the only thing I can guarantee you is these rates won't come true, because sometimes it takes us multiple years to finish a project and borrow, and the model that I use assumes that we're borrowing the year after we complete a project. So for example, if we look at a big project like Pump Station 11 near Shipyards Landing, that was a multi-year project, but it would have been at that time reflected in our long-term plan to be funded the year after it showed up in the capital budget. So we continue to have projects like that, Exit 12A, St. Philip Street, Pump Station 3, that will always be more than 1 year. And so you're committing to this level. It just might not hit till 2 years later. Then it shows in here. But you're committing the town in that year to that level of debt service ratio when you approve those capital budgets. So while it might not actually come in that year, you're committing to that level. And this is just a little bit of a different view of it, and this shows you your principal and interest payments in the year 30-31. They get pretty significant, over $12 million, and that's how our debt service ratio gets so high. Debt service ratio is principal and interest payment divided by your revenue. And so that's how we get to 30%, $12 million of principal and interest. That is water, wastewater, or not water, wastewater and town, all town debt, with the exception of the water utility. Again, just showing the capital budget list of $31 million of capital, being funded $2.3 million of capital from operating, $725,000 of gas tax, $13.1 million of grant revenue, the bulk of that being DMAF, federal and provincial related funding. There are also, though, half funding for projects like Jubilee reflected in there as well.
Funding always sounds like it's half of the funding, but it's housing accelerator funding, just for folks
theory,
watching,
it
I'm like,
could-
half funding? Why don't you get whole funding? It is whole funding for half, which is housing accelerator. I was trying to wait till you had like water in your mouth. and that
It's a
was-
terrible acronym.
Yeah, it is. And they have half and they have HAP or something like that. Like they have two things that are, anyway.
And then about 15 million of debt funding related to the projects that are in the 26-27 capital budget, and a small amount used from reserves of 60,000. So those are all of the really big things that we wanted to present. The next few slides are just the motions that we'll need closer to approval of the budget, but we just always like to have those in there so council can see what those will look like. And also just, it starts the discussion around due dates of interim and final tax bills being May 29th and September 29th.
Again, this is, I know there's a lot of information. This is our first meeting. There will be multiple meetings. And again, reminding the public that next Wednesday and Thursday, there's 2 Talk Bridgewater sessions, one during the day on the Wednesday, one in the evening on the Thursday. And yeah, we can reach out to council, and council has questions. They can get those answers from staff.
We have an answer to one of the questions already.
All right.
Okay, so the Pro Kids, the question was asked, what's the amount in requests that we've had? 31,000 in requests, and this year we've given 23,500 so far. So it was an average ask of 316 per request, and we gave 252 per request.
Sorry, my question was how much the increases have been over the last few years to
Okay.
the funding for
Okay,
Pro Kids?
so we'll get you
We'll get you that.
back
Yeah.
to 2020. Okay.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you.
Councillor Wyland.
With regards to the phone system replacement, are we aware, will that create any kind of efficiencies whatsoever for our operations? Or is this just bringing a standard up to getting rid of copper lines and going, audio
Oh,
over
no.
IP or something?
Yeah. The current phone system is very inflexible, shall we say, and downtime experience, in particular anybody working from home. So in a snowstorm, the level of involvement just for me to switch the phones so they ring staff at home, it doesn't just ring them where they're sitting. It's all manually controlled, logging into a portal. And then hoping that it actually works on your desktop when it's supposed to. It comes with a lot of headaches. It's not as flexible as perhaps we need it to be. And so one of the options we're looking at is a Teams phone system. We already use Teams for everything else, for meetings and whatnot. So it's just looking at what makes the most sense for us moving forward to last a long time as far as flexibility and integration and making it easier for us to be flexible when people have to work from home on an office closure and all those situations. So doesn't stop us from doing what we do, but it can be very challenging at times. And Modal has their own frustrations with the exact same system we have, and that's why we're both looking. Obviously, if MJSB is going to look at doing a transition, it's easier if all the partners are on board for that, and there's one project for everyone at the same time.
Thank you.
Councillor Newell.
I'm going to ask a follow-up to that. And so what exactly is the idea to eliminate existing legacy phones and switch entirely to a team-based, like, voice over IP system?
The information that I have shows about 5 different options, and so Teams isn't the only option, but
Okay.
also there's Teams through Bell, and there's Teams through, there's different providers of Teams systems, and then there's other essentially VoIP and whatnot phones. I'm not the person that has all the technical expertise in that. Someone at MJSB has been running that project for us. They did gather, the things that were missing in our existing phone system. We do have old school desk phones, with our current system. Where I came from before here, we just had little ear thingies and there was no like phone on my desk. And then if you work from home, you just took your headset with you. And then the system was very portable. Obviously, if you're working from home, it's hard to disconnect the phone from the wall and take it home with you with the current system we have. But some of the phone system options still would let us use the handsets we have on our desk, so they wouldn't be obsolete. We may just be able to reprogram them and continue to use them for those who like a desktop phone, especially reception. Those who answer the phone, sometimes the actual phone is easiest. And so we have to look at all those options. So all of them have an increased cost over what we're paying monthly just in our per landline. And then some of them have an implementation fee, and then if we needed to buy headsets and whatnot. So we may not need the whole 50,000. It just provides us with the ability to transition the phone system and then any other technology needs that we might have through MJSB. I know in the past MJSB has budgeted for it and then passed it along to us, but in this case they've just asked if we could plan our own special projects and have a budget for that, and Modal just agreed with us that we'll just each put an amount in our budget so that we can cover anything that needs to be done with the phone system. And I don't think it'll cost more than 30, but it does give us the ability to switch to whichever phone system is best.
Right.
Yeah, and I've just seen the 5 pricing options. I haven't seen the full evaluation of which one might be best for us.
Other questions? Councillor Warner?
One final question from me, and first I do want to say thank you for all your work putting this here is great, all the detail. My question is around the MPAL. With there being a wage subsidy involved there, if this is a no today, is it a no tomorrow? Like, if we said no this year, could we revisit it next year, or is it when it's gone, it's gone?
That's a Jessica question, sorry.
Sorry, I should have asked you when you were up here, Jessica.
I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
To be honest, we've been part of the MPOP program since 2021, so when we first entered it, and we went into it as a pilot, looking at we received some funding and we were doing it across multiple positions, and that came to an end, and the pilot has wrapped up. And they are looking for, we can either do a pilot or they're looking for a 5-year commitment. Otherwise, we could try to ask them again next year, but I don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty right now on all of these programs, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
So I have not been able to get a good answer from our contact at Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage about, she's preparing for renewal of 5-year contracts right now, which is very positive. She did say that if it's anything less than what they typically do, there's a higher level of scrutiny. Can't say that word right now. There'll be a higher level of looking at it. And then if there's a potential that they may or may not be there.
Okay. Thank you.
That's what I learned last week.
The halftime accessibility person, I know obviously there isn't a work plan already prepared for that person, but can you give us an idea of what kind of projects would be lost if we didn't have that position?
I don't know if it's necessarily projects lost, but it's more about the opportunity to have that look at it from an accessibility lens. So when we're looking at, we have Ellen, I think we get our accessibility coordinator now, a day a week, I think on average, half a day, that translates into. But when we're looking at doing like park design or looking at crosswalks, there's a lot of capital projects that we do that we need to build that accessibility piece into it. So it's having them involved in that, as well as even in the tendering phase, to kind of look at, are we incorporating the right language into our calls? It could be our communications and how we look at accessibility from a communication perspective. Things that half a day is not necessarily giving us, like, in terms of everything that we do, right? We use the coordinator now on a request basis, but I believe there's more need than what we're able to get from that individual. I don't know if there's anything anyone has to add to that? Okay, yeah. So if we didn't have the position, we would continue as we are now. So it would just increase the ability to build that in.
Okay.
So when you say you have half a day and you take, for an example, a crosswalk to them, that half day is to ask them questions, allow them time to research best practices and things that should be considered, and provided an answer, and they have a half day per week?
Yeah, it's a half day per week, and they
Okay.
provide advice in terms of how to incorporate that in. So I think we used the individual for Kinsman Field as an example, where we asked for some input into how can we make that area around the ball field accessible for individuals, and so our accessibility coordinator gave us some advice on that. We've used her to look at our crosswalks and the audible pedestrian piece and the tactile pieces on the ground near for people who have visual impairments, right? So she was able to provide us with some advice on that, and that's kind of how we use her now. But again, it's only half a day. And
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. If not, if you have questions as they come up throughout the week, please forward those through the CAO to all of council, so we don't ask the same question 12 times. And CAO will get that to staff. We'll get answers, and then come armed with your questions for next week as well. And then we'll have police, fire, and LCLC.
and joint
And
service.
And joint services next week.
Yeah.
So it will be another presentation. If there's nothing else, we don't have any other items on our agenda, right?
No.
Yeah, all right, motion to adjourn. Please, Councillor Newell, Councillor Vergier, we are adjourned. Thank you.